We're very excited for this class. You know, it's always exciting when we get teachers from Lochac, especially with high skill like this.
He's been after me to make mead for a while now, so I know what the goal of his yes. class scheduling is.
And I have been talking with my friend who produces a lot of honey about getting my hands on some. So I'm all set. I am all set and ready. So
with that, we'll go ahead and turn the class on over to you. If you could introduce yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I introduce myself formally, I like to do it in the following manner. Hello, I am Master Ianto van Diemen, Baron to the Court of Duke Fabian of the West, Companion to the Order of the Laurel, and I live in the good Barony of St. Florian de la Riviere in Lochac. We are fortunate that we are across the river from another barony, so we have an excellent representation of SCA people here in the mundane city of Brisbane. And today I want to take you through the process of making what these days is referred to as a traditional mead. To me, it's just mead, but common parlance I've been pulled up on a couple of times. So what that means is there are only 4 ingredients permitted for me to use in a competition entry mundanely in Australia for a traditional mead. Those ingredients are honey, water, yeast and a nutrient that's kind of counted together, and oak. And the oak is optional, so you can leave it out. I'm not going to. I really like the oak. I'm going to just put into the chat some details on something I prepared earlier. So I will have an opportunity during this session. I will go and here is something I prepared earlier. That is a different recipe. It is more complex. And I have actually put all the details in there on that link, including some videos that I made as I was testing out the setup in here. If you're going to make any kind of brewed thing, particularly we'll focus on the mead, you will need some equipment. And as you can see, I'm in a small domestic kitchen. I am fortunate that when I renovated my house, I left the original kitchen in place and built a new one in the extended section. And this is the brew kitchen now. So the sorts of things that you will need, obviously, is some saucepans. These ones are relatively small. And I use always 2 of them because they fit nicely on my domestic stove. You will need vats to put your brew into. This one is my black currant that was made in August. That always sits there for about a year before I bottle it. You will want various sort of ordinary type cooking implements. You know, my stainless steel spoon, I love it. You just gotta love a good spoon. I have some small scales there that go up to about 5 kilos. And a selection over here of various measuring equipment and a hydrometer there. I have various sterilizing solutions that I might talk about a little bit later. And if you are going to do any kind of brewing, I commend to you to have a diary. Definitely have some kind of diary. So this was my original diary from when I started brewing. It did not quite have enough space for 30 years of recipes. It ran out of gas at 28. So now I'm into my new one, which you can see is before me, and I have notes on the recipe that I did earlier, and I have notes on the recipe that I'm doing now because I've done them both this year, and I'm repeating them again to follow through on it. So we're going to get right into it. These 2 pots at the moment are ready to go. They have each got 4.5 kilograms of honey in them. This honey I purchased from a local apiarist out west of me by about 45-minute drive, and it has quite a distinctive floral flavour. When you're making a mead, it is a very good idea to taste the honey that you are working with as soon as possible. And over the years, I've kind of developed a palate for honey. What you're looking for is things that aren't too strongly flavoured unless you really know what you want out of it. A strong flavour will work, but I would warn you away from strong flavours early on. You want something that really just tastes plainly of honey. Right. This one, as I say, it has quite a distinctive floral flavour, and I'm going to work with that. So because for a traditional mead, I'm really only allowed the 4 ingredients, I'm just going to go straight into it. I have boiled some kettles here just before the session started. I've got a couple just out of view, and I'm going to use the hot water to commence the process of dissolving this honey. So these kettles that I have, I don't know what happened, but they stopped making kettles that had 2 litres of water in them. They only do ones that have 1.7 litres of water in them now. Who knows why? But it's enough. And we'll start stirring this to make sure that it's dissolving. And we'll put some heat on underneath them to raise their temperature. So we want that one. I'll try and keep this one on the front burner as much as possible because you can see into it from there. It's a bigger burner, be careful on that one.
So is the water you're using, is it distilled water or is it just tap water?
It is just tap water. Thank you for asking. For quite some time, I used spring water purchased from supermarkets. And then one day when I was doing quite a large batch, I'm part of a group, the Jolly Duke here, which has 3 laurels and our Baron in it, who make lots of drinks for the Great Northern War that takes place here each year. And so, you know, when we do that, we do a lot. You might see down to my left, there is honey buckets, the white ones, and some stainless steel kegs. I make most of the cider for the Jolly Duke when Great Northern War was on. And so we're doing it in quantity. And so one time I just sort of didn't buy enough spring water and started using tap water. And the tap water here actually turns out to brew pretty well. It's not fantastic necessarily for your pipes because it's a bit hard, but brewing with it's actually quite good. So I'm saving myself a bit of money by just using tap water. So I'll get this underway. I have a very, very sophisticated thermometer here. It's a brewing thermometer. Goes up to 100 degrees centigrade and 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that these containers of honey get warm enough or long enough that I am able to defeat any sort of bacteria or anything that might be there. Shouldn't be much. Honey being a bit of an antiseptic in its own right, I shouldn't expect to have much trouble there. But I want to get them to about 60 to 65 degrees centigrade for 15 to 20 minutes. So those kettles haven't exactly recently boiled, they're not quite up to a very high temperature. The book that I'm working from is the book that I've basically always worked from, which is The Closet of Sir Kenelm DB Opened. That can be easily found online now. It's very easy to get. People who are very strict about their documentation will probably suggest to me correctly that it's outside our period. At the time that I commenced brewing, as I said, best part of 30 years ago, it was about the only thing I could get my hands on. and I am a horrible creature of habit. So I have used it ever since, basically. People have shown me recipes for meads and things that go back much, much further. And if you do have a look at Digby, you will see frequently that it refers to using a proportion of honey to water. So, you know, we'll say, take a pot of and take 3 pots of water, things like that. So, and that proportion can be found extensively, you know, it's like 1 to 3, 1 to 4, that sort of a ratio. You'll find it through centuries and centuries of time, up to and including modern books that talk about how to make mead. And the one that I think is the most astounding one, my brother was renovating a house on the northwest coast of Tasmania, a pretty old one for Tasmanian standards. So we're talking sort of like 18th century building, sort of an early 19th. And in the walls, he found a mead recipe and it had the same proportions. So it's been consistent for a very long time. So in this particular part of the process, it's not particularly exciting. And normally I would probably add a bit of extra water to these, but I'm not really going to do too much of it. I just want to get it up to 65 and then I can sort of move on.
Could you use a candy thermometer to measure this?
Anything that can take the temperature that you want to get to. The point I was actually alluding to before I sidetracked myself about the recipe proportions was Digby's recipes will frequently say boil and scum the honey. And I do not do that anymore. Principally, the background for that was that they weren't as good at sort of spinning honey out of the combs or extracting honey out of the combs. And so that boiling process was a great way to get light bits of wax, bits of insect legs, anything like that to float to the surface. And then you could use a small sieve or something else to skim them off. But what it also does is it drives off some of the flavors of the honey. And so that's why I don't do it. And as I said, this is quite a floral flavor to this honey. And I want to try to have that present in the final outcome. So that one's coming up. It's a small burner, it doesn't want to get going so fast. So this is actually a good phase if there's any other questions. We are fairly early on in the piece, obviously.
What was the name of the book you said you worked from?
The Closet of Sir Kenelm Digby Opened.
Just not sure how that's spelt, that's all.
Kenelme, I think it is. Kenelm. If you have followed the link to my diary page that I posted earlier, you will actually find, if you sort of navigate up the tree there, that I have got a link to it on my brewing links section. So you should be able to get to it via that. That particular page, that effectively diary entry, it's my brew diary, that has my entire history there, every single thing I've ever made. If I remember to put it in my diary, which most of the time I'm pretty good at that. So,
I put the question in the chat as well. I was wondering if I wanted to achieve a higher alcohol content, should I just start with more honey than the average recipe would recommend?
So if you look amongst various recipes around the place, you will definitely see things where ultimately the alcohol content will be different. Right, so I consistently work in the area where you're making something that's effectively as strong as wine. So the last outing of the traditional mead recipe that I'm doing today, the the yeast went totally crazy. It really did well and actually pushed the alcohol content up to 14%.
Wow.
And that was unusual. Weather conditions, etc., would have made it there. You can control the alcohol content with different yeasts. Some have lower tolerance to alcohol and effectively poison themselves by being productive. And the other thing you can do, yes, as you were suggesting, is you can change the amount of honey that you use. If you want to look in amongst recipes for things called hydromel, hydro being more water, they will consistently use much less honey. So in this particular batch, overall, by the time it's decanted into the vat, we'll have 9 kilograms of honey in about 25 to 27 litres of liquid. And that is definitely enough sugar to make from anywhere from 9 to, as I was saying, about 14 or 15% alcohol by volume. If you were to use an even stronger yeast, which I don't generally recommend, you can. I have successfully got a batch up to 17% alcohol by volume by brewing. And I can tell you that it tasted absolutely terrible when it first came out of the vat. It was far too sharp. It was a very heavily spiced plum. It was a spiced plum. And out of the vat, it was appalling. I mean, I make no joke about this. You did not want that near your palate at all, because
mine doesn't climb higher than, say, 8 or 9%. That's why I'm like hoping to find the. Yeah. But yeah, I'm gonna check out different yeasts and see what I can do, and so increase the amount.
Frequently, people will recommend a couple. Here in Australia, the brands that would be there, and I think several of them would be available throughout the world. The Lalvin manufacturer is one that I have consistently used for many years. And a lot of people, when they're talking about making mead, will recommend Lalvin EC 1118. This is a champagne yeast. If you want high alcohol content, that's the one to go for. But you will have to be ready for the effect that has on a mead. It makes it very harsh. So if I come back to that spice plum one, in about 3 years, it was tolerable to drink. In about 5 years, a lot of the overspicing and the spices that I had used had settled out, because I foolishly used powdered spices. Don't do that. And so at 5 years, it was good. At 10 years, absolutely awesome, just incredible. And it maintained that really high quality until it was 22 years old, where the last few bottles were gifted at the 25th anniversary of the Barony of Innisfail, Tasmania in Australia. It was gifted to the Crown and the Baron and Baroness, the last of it. So that's the kind of patience you may have to have. If you're looking at the next kind of yeast down in that range, what's called the D47. The D47, whilst I have a yeast here, which is my local homebrew supplier, they call it mead yeast. It is my supposition that they have bulk purchased D47 and repackaged it and are not allowed to use the brand name anymore. But it has all the characteristics of the D47. So it can go to about 15 or 16% alcohol by volume, but usually doesn't. Usually manages about 10, 11%. And that, with a nice honey and careful execution, that will be drinkable almost straight away in most cases.
Yeah, I'd be happy with 12%, because 8 is just a little, it's nice, but it's also a little deceptive. So.
Yeah. The other thing to consider is I always use a yeast nutrient, always. Because of the nature of honey, it has a tendency to kind of resist the growth early on. And so if you give the yeast a yeast nutrient, you have a much better chance of it getting started better, and you'll probably get a higher alcohol content. So that's the advantage there. Because I also make melamels, which is the mead with a fruit, I deliberately go for a much softer yeast for that one, once again using the Lalvin products. I use the Lalvin 71B. Lalvin 71B really reacts well with fruit. It pulls out the fruit flavors, it really emphasizes them. And it's just magnificent, it really is. So I was put onto that at a Penzi, taught by another brewing role. He actually did batches of mead where he separated out the batches. You know, he made about as much as I'm going to be making today, and then separated them all into different containers and brewed them all with different yeasts, and then we had a tasting of all the different yeasts. So he showed the 1118, the D47, the 71B, and two others I'm afraid I don't remember. And that was really very enlightening, an excellent talk. So that's very well worth it. So yeah,
I know I'm hijacking. Sorry, I'm hijacking a little bit. Just one last question, and I'll be quiet after that. What is your opinion on the mangrove mead yeast? Because it's the Californian one, which is good for Australian temperatures. I'm here in Sydney, so is that any good, or should I stay away from it?
Are you referring to the Mangrove Jacks brand?
Yeah, that one.
Okay,
the Californian one is like for 20 to like all the way up to 30 degrees, I think, even.
Yeah. So
which
that
one,
one
helps.
So the Mangrove Jacks MO5, you're talking about the MO5?
Yeah, I think so.
So they call that their mead yeast. It is a champagne yeast. So you treat it like the 1118. So beware. I would not recommend MO5 or EC 1118 unless you're ready for what it does. It pushes the alcohol content very high, and it's quite vigorous, and definitely still using yeast nutrient. You want some kind of yeast nutrient in there. So those are up to temperature now, and normally I would top them up a little bit, a couple of extra litres of water, keep them at 65 degrees for about 20-25 minutes, and then the lids would go on like I've just done, the heat would go off, and I would walk away. I'd walk away until tomorrow. So I wanted to show you the whole process, which is why I had the link to all the stuff I did yesterday, and that was to prepare this one here. So this one, which is foreshortened, I just call it Mr. Massillon's, it has more ingredients. So it has the honey, the water, it has hops, cloves, and ginger. And I've done that one earlier this year, and it's sensational. It is really tasty. So I've done that here so that I can show the rest of the process. So vats like this, 65 degrees, 20 minutes or so, make sure you kill off any bacteria, lids on, cool it off. Obviously, if you have a wort cooler or any technology that allows you to cool it off instantly, you just go ahead, cool it down, get it into your vat. But I've got the vat done here, and I'm ready to go with the next steps along the way. So what I need to do first, and be shocked, I'm just going to take water out of the tap now. Everything else is sterilized. This is sterilized, and now I'm just going to take water from the tap. So I've got away with it up to now.
Ianto, so just for perspective, how many bottles do you have sitting on the shelves that you've brewed currently?
In the vicinity of 500.
So just a little bit of a hobby of yours then.
Yeah. Part of the event, I'm saying that this is going to be the second time I've done this recipe this year, given I did it in January. But I have not used up all of the stuff from the original batch. And I've spoken to you about how keeping mead is really advantageous. It's just magnificent how well it ages. A bad mead after a couple of years will be nice. And you can basically rescue yourself with patience. So, oh yeah. Having my nose over the top of that, the cloves and the ginger is lovely. If you have follow the link onto the page, you'll see that the first video is me digging up the ginger from my garden. Well, my garden, it is Tanger's garden, really. She's the one who really knows the gardening side of things. So that's got me nearly to 20 litres, so I need to go again. Yeah, if I had another camera free, I might wander one through into the front sitting room here, which has got all the bottles up on the wall. But the intro picture kind of gives you some idea. I've got a wall like that with all the bottles in the racks. So that's how it's doing, and a few in a bookcase in one of the other rooms. But it does give you a tremendous advantage if you start to brew in a reasonable amount reasonably quickly and keep them, because you get the opportunity to do as my good lady occasionally does, and she sort of says, "Oh, I'd like a bottle of black currant," and I'm sort of going, "How old?" And she goes, "Old." It's a lot of fun.
So are you just filling up your empty one with water, or the one that's already got liquid in it?
I was pouring then, I didn't hear the end of the question. I'm sorry, would you please repeat that?
Are you pouring the tap water to fill up the empty one, or the one that's got liquid in it, and how much are you putting in?
Okay, so in effect, similar to what I had put together in the pots earlier, is in this one with some spices and herbs. And so it was not nearly full. And to get where I want to get, I want to bring this up to the 25 litre mark, because that should give me the kind of proportions of volume of honey to volume of water that are recommended by the original recipe. It is actually slightly more water than that original recipe recommends, but it kind of suits my palate, and sort of people who've sampled it seem to like that. I might just leave that at the 24 mark. And what we'll do is we'll show another of the steps where we will take a specific gravity reading to see what the level of sugars and things is in there at the moment. Sterilize the equipment again. So actually I should stir that up a bit just to be sure, because it may not have incorporated fully. That does smell good. The combinations of some of the herbs and spices that are in those recipes, like I say, published back in the mid-1600s, there are some things in there where you're going, that is an excellent combination of flavours. The people clearly made it regularly, drank it with great enjoyment, because the balance of some of the herbs and spices in those recipes is really good. So I'm using probably amongst the most basic of tools to measure this specific gravity. So I have a column of liquid here, and I have a floating hydrometer. You can get a refractometer device, which also will give you an indication. Right, and as you can possibly see, that float is really floating very, very high in the liquid. The little blue band that you see on that hydrometer is the recommended specific gravity to make wine. And you will notice that this is higher than that. So we have a specific gravity that really is quite high. This is where I kind of embarrass myself at how bad my eyesight is as I try to read this. And frequently, so we're at the 1.1. 1.15. And so when I made it last, it was at the 1.10. So we can afford to go down a little bit, which I will do.
What does the hydrometer actually tell you, sorry?
It tells you the density of the liquid, right? So this liquid with the honey dissolved in it is thicker than water. Right? And you take an initial reading like that, and that gives you an indication of how much sugar is in there, and effectively it's how much processable sugar is present in the liquid. And the yeast will eat that sugar, turning it into alcohol, and the alcohol is less dense than water. So you take a specific gravity reading at the start, a specific gravity reading at the end, put it through a bit of a calculator thing, and you get your alcohol by volume as a result. So that's very handy to be able to tell people how much they're actually drinking, because in this day and age, it's very wise to make sure that people can safely stay under legal limits when they're driving. I'm just going to put the one, it's only 1 more litre. Let's get some water boiling. Only little pauses when we're filling all the liquids. This will be somewhat noisy, my apologies. Let me stir it up again and we'll take another reading. So I've topped this vat up. It is now full with 25 litres of brew to be. And my notes from the last time I did this did say top it up to 25 litres. I was just interested to see what it would be with a slightly less. And we'll measure that again. Yep, there we go. We've got that to the 1.10 that the original did. The actual graduations are here. The other thing I often do is I take a photograph of it so that I can refer to it later. And this is where you definitely want to note this in your diary. Now we're going to play with oak. These are toasted French oak chips. And I'm going to use, I'm tossing up between 100 grams and 200 grams. So I'm thinking this one's got quite a lot of herbs and spices in it. I'm thinking 200 grams.
Is this oak like the wood?
Say again, please.
Is this oak like the wood?
Yeah, this is French oak chips from France. So an oak tree from France, chopped up, chipped up, and charred. So it's been toasted. That definitely add some flavor. And when you read the early recipes, they'll tell you about, the terms like ton it up close in a barrel. So that they mean to seal it well, very well inside a barrel. Also another way you might find yourself getting carbonation. So Go nearly there. There we go. 1 grams. I bought a kilo of this because it's an easier way to do it, and I nearly always use 100 or 200 grams in something. I recommend the use of oak.
I've got a question. So is this to simulate like it is brewed in a oak cask, or is it part of the brewing process that they did during period as well?
It's to simulate the cask. In the period, they would almost certainly have had a barrel. And so the exposure of your drink to the interior surface of the barrel would have brought characteristics of the wood into the brew. And this is to simulate that, absolutely. So
How much have you got there?
200 grams. Recipe in full on the linked page. Now, as I'm sure you can understand, I'm trying with sterilized gear, stuff that's been up to 65 degrees, all that sort of stuff. This is my most likely point of some kind of infection. And there's not much I can do with this because I want the oak characteristic in my drink. So the habit I have, I'm using, and is it a good idea? I don't know. Will some people be shocked that I'm going to do this? Probably. I am going to now pour boiling water over this. So I'm trying to kill off anything bad with high temperature. I'm going to take that up to the 1 litre mark. This is a 1 litre high temperature jug. But I'll lift it up. I don't know if you can see it, but as you can see, the act of pouring boiling water on that has pulled out an incredible brown stuff out of the oak. And I want that. I don't want to lose that, because that's the kind of characteristic. If you could smell this right now, it smells like wood. It's just beautiful smell. Oh yeah. And I want that characteristic. I want that in the brew. So all of this, water and all, is going to go in there. Now, is this a great idea to try to sterilize your oak like this, but still use the water? It's worked so far. So I'll let that sit for a minute or two.
So if you know you're going to do that, Ianto, you could account for that and that extra water you added earlier, possibly then, if you're trying to hit that 1 hydrometer mark.
Yeah, I kind of, occasionally I'll try to take the hydrometer reading after this has gone in, because you don't get a full litre here, but you can affect the mark. But when you've got all this oak floating on the top of your drink, it's really hard to get your sample tube anything other than contaminated, which is where a refractometer would be a great idea. And I'm keep looking online for a refractometer, because with the refractometer, you only take a little pipette drop, place it on a glass plate, squash the glass plate, and you view the liquid through a gauge. I have no idea how the thing works, but it gives you the graduations, and you can get your specific gravity reading at the start. So that's all fantastic. So I'm gonna pull that in now.
So if you had access to a full-size oak barrel of traditional shape, you could just skip this, couldn't you?
It would be, to my mind, it would be one of those things I would definitely like to do at some stage in my brewing career, is to have a barrel. Early on, when I started to look into that sort of thing, about the only thing you could get was 400 litre barrels, and this again, that's fairly massive. Although recently I found that some of the winemakers are using 200-litre barrels, and I could probably manage a 200-litre batch, but I don't know where I'm going to put the barrel. So it would be, somebody's going, it's this oak, I don't want to waste any of this, so I'm trying to get it all out of the container.
One of my neighbors as a kid, I think she must have used to make wine or something, and she had a small one. I don't know what size it was, but it was decently large to me as a child, and she kept it in the hallway near when you would go downstairs. So if you've got space under your stairs, you could put it there.
Yeah. The trick is actually having enough room to use it. So I mean, these would be like 26 or so litres each, these particular vats that I've got. So I'd have to upscale there. But what I would probably do is I'd probably rotate batches through it. So fill it up in the first place, and then after it's sat in the barrel for a few months, take enough for a bottling out, and then top it up again. So, right. It does look a bit odd in there. And once again, I don't have a portable camera to show you, unfortunately, but it's just happily floating on the top. Right, and so the next unusual thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare the yeast. So once again, I'm going to get a little bit of the boiling water. And then I'm going to try and bring it down to about 30 degrees C with cold water. It's boiling water, so that's way too hot. Some of these little processes at the end are a little bit fiddly, but not too bad. It doesn't take a lot to sort them out. This is a step that if you wanted to, you could possibly get away with not doing. Particularly since I'm going to be inoculating this with 10 grams of yeast from the pack. Chances of this failing are pretty slim. So, but this kind of helps kickstart your yeast a little bit. Not really in view terribly well here, my apologies. Just going down those last couple of degrees. That's the way.
I had a yeast question. Have you tried cultivating any yeast from like normal airborne strains?
I haven't. I have definitely had a few meads that other people have given me where that has been successful. All I can say is my principal goal, and this is a personal thing, so please don't take this as you have to do what I say here. I want to be able to reproduce what I have done consistently every time I do it. And so for that, it's a very good idea to ensure that I have the same yeast, I add the same amount of nutrient, I do the same process all the way through. I have absolutely tasted, and in fact, to this very recipe, the first time I saw this recipe done, it was done by a lady in New Zealand, and she gave me a sample of that when I was over there visiting, and absolutely perfect. And that was a wild yeast. It was sensationally good, which is what, you know, I said to her after I sampled hers. I went, I'm going to make that recipe. It only took me a couple of years to actually decide to do it. And when I did, I'm sort of going blown away about how good I got it to come out. I hope comparable to hers. I don't think it was quite as good as hers. But now I'm trying for a reproduction to see if I've got that recipe consistent with this yeast under these conditions. My conditions, you know, I'm in Queensland, it has the higher temperature. Like the outside temperature today is over 30 degrees. Inside this room, it was about 20 degrees earlier today. That's about 25 actually. So look at that. Oh, just can't even open the pack. This is Yeast Nutrient. And I'd like to tell you a bit more about the brand and the details and all that sort of stuff. But once again, my homebrew supply place just sort of goes Yeast Nutrient, and it's worked every time. So this is a half teaspoon measure, and I'm going to put 2 teaspoons of this in here. There's probably all sorts of sulfites, well, wouldn't be sulfites in this, but phosphates and calciums and all sorts of stuff in there. I've got no idea. They don't tell me. There are a couple of really quite fancy nutrients that people will recommend when using them to do mead, and that's the Fermaid brand. But that has a necessity, I think it's a Fermaid O, but it's got like 2 or 3 phases where you do it at different times. And I'm very much in favor of, like, the lid is open now whilst I'm working, but once that lid is shut, that will be shut, and I will not open it again until I can tell that it's not cloudy in here anymore and that we're good to go. So that's a 10-gram pack of yeast, which is, it is kind of overkill. Frequently you buy yeast in 5-gram packs, and it should be sufficient to do this much. A 5-gram pack should be fine for this. But I just sort of go, I want this yeast. This is the yeast I want. And so I'll hit it with a 10-gram pack. And that's also what the brew shop sells. It's just a convenience factor. $3 US for the yeast pack, $4 for what has been a multi-use pack of the nutrient. The honey that I'm using here today was, because I bought so much, it was $7.50 a kilogram. I start to get a little bit touchy when the price is over $10 a kilogram. It won't stop me if it's a particularly good flavored honey. It won't stop me, but that does mean, you know, you think about that for a minute. At $10 a kilo, I just use 9 kilos. That's $90 to get started. You know, $3 or $4 here. I bought a kilo of the oat chips, so you're talking about sort of $10 or $15 worth of oat chips. Mead can be quite expensive, particularly because of the honey. So if you see here now, because I put that together with the nutrient and it's getting pretty cloudy and it's starting to sort of burble away quietly to itself already. So we're in a world where when I inoculate that into a solution that's full of sugars, hopefully what we should get is an explosion of yeast growth and production of CO2 and alcohol. So I'll just give that a little bit more of a stir and go ahead with that. Some people would say 15 or 20 minutes. I'm not going to make you wait 15 or 20 minutes. I'm pretty confident this is going to go. It's got all the characteristic of that. Right, we're going to put the lid on. The lid has an airlock. It has one hole in the top and it has an airlock on it. There's a sterilization solution in the airlock here. And so as the yeast starts to produce alcohol and CO2, because the vat is sealed, it will form pressure, and that pressure will be released as the CO2 burbles out of the airlock. So it will get to a fairly vigorous start, and here you find that this particular style of airlock, there's a different style that's available, which is this style. These ones are very effective as well. These aren't so great if it gets really vigorous. They can tend to form a, stuff can get into them and there's not enough of a reservoir of liquid. I like those, but these ones are better when things get off to a big start. Occasionally I'll change the airlock halfway through, because in a warm environment like I have here, this will tend to evaporate out quite quickly once it's burbling, because it forms a large surface area inside there. The other thing that you're constantly playing with is everything must be sealed. If any of the seals here are not effective, you will not be able to tell that the brew is still going and active, because you've got a tiny air leak. And the only batch I have ever lost in my career was because the grommet around that airlock perished slightly and allowed a little bit of air to get in, and a batch of cider, which, granted, because of COVID, had sat here in the kitchen for months because we couldn't hold the event it was supposed to be drunk at, went off. And that's in my entire career, that's the only batch I've ever had that went off. So if you're careful with your cleanliness, careful with your seals, keeping an eye on things, it should all work beautifully. So we are actually at a point where that's done. So we kind of switched halfway through the process where we dissolved the honey into water. That's cooling. And I had done that yesterday with this batch, and first thing this morning it went into the vat, and then so when this one was sitting at 65 degrees for its 20 or 30 minutes, which it's done now, and now it's cooling, I've turned everything off, it would be decanted into here, so I'll do that tomorrow after work probably, and the final steps that you've seen me do here today, where we topped it up to where we wanted, we took the specific gravity reading to know where we were up to, and pitched in there the oak and the yeast and nutrient. That's it. That is making mead. Do we have any more questions? It's going to be yummy.
How long does it sit in the vat for?
I'm a very, very patient person. So it can sit in the vat for quite some time. I don't filter anything. So this particular one, the previous batch of that, which was made early this year, it was made on the 23rd of the 1st. It had activity from the yeast commenced the very evening of the yeast being pitched. It got off to a flying start, absolutely fantastic. So it was active on the 24th of the 1st, and it was bottled on the 4th of the 4th. So, we're talking a little bit over, not quite 3 months in the vat. Because I left it so long, this yeast, the particular yeast, one of the reasons I really like it is that it settles out very quickly. When it's active, it will be all cloudy, all the yeast alive in there. Because it's producing CO2, it keeps the liquid circulating inside it, and so it's effectively constantly stirred up. And then when the yeast is finished, basically no more sugars to eat, or it's died off because it's poisoned itself with alcohol, then it'll start to settle out. And this particular yeast that I'm using settles out really, really well. And if you'll bear with me for just one moment, I'll step out of camera shot and be back shortly. So this is a bottle that was made with that yeast. This has not been filtered. So that's what it comes out looking like. I can't actually.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I can see how that's going.
Oh, yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how clear it comes from just waiting.
Beautiful.
You may find that the yeast you use or the conditions that you're in may not manage that. So, yeah, some people have got filters and use a filtering process. I don't. So then the next thing is obviously you're standing your bottles up, but if you're using corks, you'll want to lie them down. And so you'll get, and actually as I've laid that down, I can just see the tiniest little bit of sediment I've stirred up in the bottom of that bottle. And I'm still very happy with that. I don't know if you can see it, but towards the bottom there, you can just see that I've stirred up the tiniest little bit of sediment because these are normally stored standing up, because I've switched over to use of the screw-on plastic tops. It has got to the point at which I buy bottles now, so because I just use them so quickly. Yeah, but this particular one here, to me, this is my signature drink. This is the black currant. This is the black currant Melamel. So I have made this nearly every year for nearly 30 years. There's a little gap where I sort of missed a couple. So right now, when this goes in the bottle, I can do, have you come across the term of vertical tasting? A vertical tasting is where you get the same recipe over a number of years. And so I can do a vertical tasting on this currently at 5 years. And once this one's done and bottled at 6 years. And that is really, it's really very special. Being able to do that vertical tasting. I did it at a feast about a year ago now when I had 5 in the vertical tasting. And I could tell you, I used 10 kilos of honey, 10 kilos of honey, 9 kilos of honey, changed honey vendor, and then another batch. And so the youngest is incredibly sweet. It's incredibly sweet. And so young people really like sweet drinks. And so they're all over the youngest of the brews. So the last couple of years, I think they're the best, they're the best. And in that lineup, because we started from the youngest to the oldest, it went from sort of a young one with 10 kilos of honey, a young one with 10 kilos of honey, and then now we're at a 3-year-old one with 9 kilos of honey, and you kind of lost the young people there. And then you gained the adults who love red wine, because as it ages, it dries off. And because it had only 9 kilos of honey in it, it was on the dry side anyway. And then as you get older and older, you get that the aging part of it, where it has become, the flavors just balance out really well with age, with meads. I can't say enough, the longer you can leave it, the better. If you're going to starting out at this size, you obviously take a risk. If you're not comfortable, if you haven't managed to get your sterilization processes and your making process, you may muck up a batch. I never did. When I started, I was careful to follow the recipes that were there, even though it was a very limited number of recipes available. And so I got them right from pretty early on, which just encouraged me to do more and more. But I have definitely encountered people who just through, bad luck more than anything else. I think I don't think it's hard to get these recipes wrong, particularly with the mead. You just look at that going, honey is going to help you because it's kind of antiseptic in its own right. And then, I'm using tap water there. If you were to use spring water, I wouldn't recommend distilled. You do want some of the ions in it and things like that. So you do want a little bit of minerals and stuff coming from your water. So spring water. or have your tap water tested. If you're in an area where it's chlorinated or anything like that, you can get it into a container and let it stand. That will outgas off your water. So, you can try a few things just to put yourself instead. But even if you only make a 5 litre, which that's kind of equivalent to a 1 gallon jug, you can get those 1 gallon 5 litre brewing bottles quite easily. And with a bung and an airlock in them, you can work with them. The smaller neck can make things like oaking it a bit of a pain, but you can still do it. You can actually get oak staves, which are sticks, and just split them so they'll fit in the neck. So you can do that as well. And if you do that and you're successful with a 5 litre, I would still say to you, try very hard to keep a bottle, and using these little 375 ml bottles is great. Try and keep one aside. Make sure you do your next batch before you've run out. Because the number of times I've encountered people who go, I did my first mead, it was sensational, now it's all gone. And I'm going, and how long was it between when you made it, started drinking it and finished? And they said, oh, it was about 3 months. So I'm going, oh, if you were so pleased with it after the end of 3 months, just how good would it have been at a year or 3 years old? And my experience consistently with meads is definitely they're starting to show what they really can do at about a year. Then you absolutely know where they're going to be in terms of flavour and things at 3. And then they've got legs for ages. I've definitely got stuff that's coming up to 25 years old in the bottles around the place. And I'm really looking forward to it. The last time Tan just sort of said, get me an old one, when I really went after one of the old ones. I have some magnums of some stuff that was 23 years old at the time. And I carefully decanted 375 mils and then served us with, because the blackcurrant, it makes an incredible sediment. It's just the most bizarre thing. And you have to decant very carefully. So I had 3 bottles that had the glorious blackcurrant in there in terms of colour and clarity. And I gifted one to some friends who wouldn't have it. And so they kind of paid me in kind. And they valued 375 mils of it at $60 in effect for that age. So it's just marvelous. It's gorgeous stuff. I'm not going to stop making it. It's just too good.
What's your opinion on back sweetening, and what do you like? If you do back sweeten, do you prefer honey or malt?
I have never back sweetened.
Oh.
I'm on several Facebook groups and lists and things. I'm on the Australian Mead Makers lists, and back sweetening is very popular. And I don't have a problem with it. This is one of these things. If you want to have a drink be a certain way, and you find you brewed it was too dry and you want to make it sweet, absolutely back sweeten it. I would recommend to try to maintain the flavour that you use the honey that you used. If it's a mead, use the honey that you used to make it to back sweeten it. What I try to do when it comes to if I want it sweet, if I want it dry, I try to control that with the yeast. But I do have the advantage of the years of experience where I can sort of go, I know this one will stop here. Right, so I know I can get it to be sweet. I don't know, you use as we were saying earlier, use the EC 1118 yeast, give it the best conditions it can get, make sure it's got good nutrient, and it will munch it out to dry. It absolutely will, and if that's what you wanted, you'll get it. The only recipe that has defeated me consistently to the point at which I still each year I go, I'm going to do it, is an elderflower wine. I grow the plants. The plants are growing in the garden. and they're flowering now. And I'm just, it's done my head in. I keep telling the story because the very first batch I made, I effectively made what people refer to as an elderflower champagne, but what they really mean is a low alcoholic, bubbly elderflower. And the first time I did it like that, it was excellent, but it didn't last because it was about trying to keep the bubbliness and not let the yeast actually take over. But as soon as I left it, the yeast takes over. So then I said to myself, no, I want to get a sweet elderflower wine that's still not carbonated. And to this day, I cannot get the recipe right. And I've tried it 6 or 7 times. The diary will show it. It's in the, it'll be in the diary. And that's, like I say, I shake my head. I still can't get that one right. And the fact that, you know, at one of the Canterbury fairs over in New Zealand that I went to, one of the other brewers over there was handing around the cordial version of it, which was sensational. It was so good. And so it was bubbly and sweet and low alcohol content and just divine. If she walked past me with a bottle in her hand, it was like, you've got to fill my cup. You have to fill my cup. But I want to do that in a still wine, and it has defeated me. So, yeah.
I have a question about Melamels. I do a fair bit of cider, and if you're doing cider and you add the fruit at the beginning, well, you add the apple juice and then you add a separate flavoring fruit at the beginning, the yeast will eat all the fruit flavor. You'll get a generic cider. So I generally ferment out my apple juice and then add a secondary flavoring fruit at the end, let it sit for a couple of weeks before I bottle. Do you have any advice for making melamels to keep the fruit taste distinct so you can figure out what kind of a fruit it is as you're drinking it?
So I have done a fairly limited set of melamels, the black currant being the principal one, and that is a very strong flavour. So when I first made that, we were growing the fruit in Tasmania, and so really you just needed to crush it and wash it. We didn't juice it fully because they're very hard to juice, and it has a very strong flavour, and there was never any issue with that keeping the flavour throughout. The other melamel that I have done is Cider, which is with apple juice, and the Cider definitely keeps the flavour very well. I have done ciders because I do make a lot of cider and I drink a lot of cider myself with the kegging system here, you know, make up a batch and keg it up. And so I have absolutely used the same method that you're describing, where I add a fruit to the cider mix, and once again, I make no bones about it. When I'm making cider, I use a kit. I always do. It's for speed and convenience. This is a Blackrock cider kit made by the company in New Zealand, and New Zealand's fruits are just excellent, absolutely excellent. And so I've used that as a base for Cider and for ciders which have fruit added to them. And I feel I must have been very fortunate because I have never lost the fruit flavour from a cider when I put the fruit in it during the brewing process. So I'm not sure what the issue there might be. Possibly because I've consistently used quite strong berry flavour type things. I really do like raspberries and blackberries, boysenberries, blueberries, those sorts of things, and they do seem to give their flavour very nicely to anything that you're making. Strawberries are very tricky, I've found, and I believe that might be largely because they do something funny in their ripening process that means that they aren't actually sweet. They just fool your taste buds into thinking they are. which is bizarre. They do some enzymal changes apparently when they turn red that fools you into thinking they're sweet, but they've still got all the sour flavors in them that they used when they were a different color. So which fruits have you actually used?
My best one is a black cherry. I also do a raspberry, but generally speaking, I'll do my apple juice, let it ferment, add my secondary flavoring fruit for a week, maybe 10 days. I bottle it. I let it sit for 3 or 4 days until it gets carbonated. Then I run it through my dishwasher on high. And so I have a bottle carbonated dishwasher drink, and it's stopped the fermentation and it keeps my fruit taste. Mine is very black cherry and very raspberry tasting. But if I let it sit and let it ferment out, I get a tasty cider. Don't get me wrong. It's, but maybe my palate isn't great, but I couldn't tell you that was raspberry or blueberry or black cherry. It's just a tasty, it's a tasty cider drink, unless I stop the fermentation.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. I do not have an adequate explanation for that. And I do feel that your efforts to effectively have a steeping process for your alcohol, and then that will kickstart the yeast to give you a secondary ferment in the bottle, and then stopping it with your dishwasher. That's really lateral thinking, and that's a very good idea. I will admit that because I make the ciders for the Great Northern War, and at Great Northern War, sweet flavoured ciders are extremely popular. The lollywood for the young ones who haven't developed their palates yet. Sorry if I've insulted anybody, but I do sometimes despair that I've worked hard to get this flavour balance right at this dryness, and you won't touch it because it's not sweet enough. You'll get there. But what we do with the Great Northern War ciders is I actually do a mass base. So I'll do 60 litres or 100 litres from kit of dry cider, and I just brew it out to dry completely because I can carbonate it in the kegs. And the most horrible cheat of all time is to make it sweet and flavoured. We buy high-end drink cordials, the ones that are like a concentrated cordial for, put a little bit in a glass, top it up with water, and you've got a peach tea drink, or you've got a blackberry drink, or you've got a raspberry drink, and just put a whole bottle in the bottom of one of these, top it up with dry cider, and off you go. And I've made an absolutely gorgeous elderflower cider that way, with a very high quality elderflower cordial to add the flavour. Now that is a horrific cheat, and I admit to it readily, because I don't think we want anybody to think I'm a genius at making cider of all these fantastic flavors. It's really just, what do I want? And one of the ones I have done to try to push it to sweet and give it blackcurrant is I actually purchase off the shelf apple and blackcurrant drink, the actual juice, and put a couple of litres in the bottom of the keg, and then top it up with the dry cider mix and then carbonate it. So that's and they are distinctively matching up to the flavors. The brand of reasonable quality cordials that we use up here is Bickford's, but I know anywhere that you think is a reasonable cordial mix is a great way to flavour cheaply and easily in a cider. But that's a terrible cheat. And I will admit now with the blackcurrant melamel, I live in Queensland. I cannot grow blackcurrants. I cannot buy them to save me. It's it's like $5 for 150 grams of blackcurrants. So I import. I go through an importer and buy blackcurrant concentrate from New Zealand to make these. And so last time I bought that, 15 litres for $500, and 1 litre goes into these batches. and 10 to 10.5 kilos of honey. So it's built to be sweet at the start, but the blackcurrant has an incredible acidity and a magnificent ratio between its sugar and acid. So it actually is better juice for making a wine than grape is for wines. So it's an excellent fruit. Its acidity and the way it can carry sweetness is just magnificent. So I consistently go back to blackcurrant for that. I haven't really given you a bonus way of doing it. I think if you've found that you just lose flavor from the various fruits that you are getting, you've probably knocked the process on the head there. Let it brew out, get a secondary started off the fruit, and then kill the fermentation.
Thank you. I mean, that's for cider, and I'm not. I've done a couple of batches of mead, and so I'm trying to learn from someone that's got the experience how to do the mead correctly. Well, I've got 5 gallons of mead. Your class will be starting me on several of those.
I'll be looking forward to visiting with you later, Victor. But I do have a question about, you had mentioned that you had brewed the one cider that went on. What are the things that we should be looking for in case, our batch goes off?
What does that look like in mead?
What does that look like in mead? Does it start becoming cloudy again, or smells terrible? I mean,
I've never had a mead go off, not once, not ever. It was only ever a cider, and that was a bad seal. And as soon as I opened the top of the vat, you could smell it. So it had that vinegar tang to the smell. And I sampled it, and in effect, you could tell that in fact, I had made what possibly could have been reasonable, but I wasn't going to go near it, because once you've got vinegar in the environment, you want to get rid of it. Absolutely, it's got to go. Because it's effectively a bacterial infection that if it gets into the rest of if it gets into your environment, if you are somebody who likes to do kombuchas or make sauerkrauts and things like that, and you want to brew, have a very strict separation between them, very much so, right? Because one is a bacterial growth that is fermenting the product, and the other is a yeast growth, and the bacterial is usually stronger. So keep them well separated, up to and including completely different implements if you're going to be really careful about it. Yeah. I have definitely had somebody who has, I think they posted on the Australian Mead Makers list, saying that they were a big kombucha maker. They started a batch of mead and suddenly had this incredible honey vinegar, which wasn't bad. Apparently, they were reasonably pleased with it, but no, that was not what they were after. Yeah.
So jumping off of that, have you ever tried a sour mead?
No. I've brewed them to dry, but I've not tried to make something sour. I mean, when you say that, I can't actually think of any reference I've seen that speaks about a recipe that will bring a mead to a sour mead. Is that something you've come across? Because I haven't.
I've seen it a number of times. Usually it seems to happen to people by accident. They get a lactobacillus infection in their mead, and it forms that scum on top, but it's apparently identifiable usually by sight, and I guess if you let it run long enough, it's still perfectly drinkable, but sour. So I've never intentionally tried to do one. I don't know if other people have had any experimentations along those lines.
So that does sound like effectively you get what is like a vinegar mother that establishes itself. So bacterial infection, similar to the kombucha style, which are bacteria ones. And I mean, kombucha is magnificent. When you've got that under control and you've got that process working, you can get some marvelous flavors that tend towards that sort of vinegary sour side. All I would say once again is you want to keep the two apart. You don't want, you don't want them side by side like this, because any kind of contamination from the bacteria getting into the sugars in any of the, if you're trying to make wine or cider or mead or anything, they'll get in there and they will do their work. They're very effective. And some of them can even break down some alcohols and produce from that. Yeah, I wonder if sort of like a kombucha starter into a honey mix. I don't really want that in my house. That's, because the separation is something that's pretty important. But yeah, I definitely think it'd work. Yeah, particularly if you had a reliable starter that had produced the particular flavors that you're after. Yeah, that'd be fascinating. I'd be happy to do that at somebody else's house. It's just not mine.
How constant is your temperature where you are? I'm here in the Pacific Northwest. We go from fairly moderately cold to 105 maximum in summer, so like 37. Not terribly cold. I used to live in Alaska. Oregon and Washington are pretty moderate. So what? How controlled is your house for temperature wise?
So it's not perfectly controlled by any stretch of the imagination. I have the advantage that in this section of the house, everything is made of brick. So all the walls, every wall is brick. And by and large, so this is up against a solid brick wall into a shaded area on the other side. This is a solid brick wall onto another room, and these are sort of solid brick walls here. And so that tends to make the temperature variation slower. It happens slower, but it doesn't stop it from getting to 32 to 35 degrees centigrade in this room. So right at this minute, it's a hot day today. So inside this room, we're at 28 degrees centigrade in here. Right now, that's probably higher than you might like it to be, but the yeasts that I use seem to tolerate it. So I have finished off a mead and pitched the yeast as I have here today at 32 degrees centigrade. The room where I store all of the bottles, that one, there are no windows that aren't heavily curtained, and the wine racks up against this interior wall, this one here. So it's at the center of the house with as much insulation as we can. It's insulated in the roof to try and keep that temperature range to change slowly. So that the key, if you can't control the temperature, is that the temperature change is slow. So that's all about insulation and thermal mass. So when we did our extension, our office, which is in the other section of the house, we actually had that all done with heavy block work and all concrete filled to try to, because that's the tech room, it's got all the tech in it, and that stays the coldest in the house. But it has an air conditioner in there. That's all got ducted air conditioning in there. Okay. So yeah, if you can make it that it doesn't change temperature fast, you are probably fine.
And my other question is on aeration. I have some friends who started as homebrewers and now have a commercial meadery, and we were discussing mead. And they're like, "Oh, well, you're talking mead sitting a year or so. Have you tried aerating it?" They were saying that the aeration of the mead, they just use for their homebrew batches, one of the fish tank aerators. Yeah, that totally will change everything. You will get your mead aerated. It will be consistent. And I'm just curious if you have any experience with an aeration device.
only from the kind of anecdotal evidence that you are speaking of, I have never felt the need to do it. So I get brews that go fast enough to completion fast enough that I don't feel I need to force it. My ethos is do this work as we've done today, get it into this vat, right? Get the yeast to live. Occasionally I'll get a failed start and I'll open the lid and re-inject a new yeast. That's happened, like, I think in my entire career, like 3 or 4 times. I've had a failed start. I left a yeast batch too long in the cupboard or in the fridge, and it just didn't have any legs to go, so I had to get a fresh yeast. But after that, when that is sealed, that's sealed, it is my expectation that I will not open this lid again until I'm going to bottle it. And this is something that I see people swear by processes, and I am not going to gainsay them because I have not done it. Right, so aeration, definitely. The Fermaid nutrient cycle, which I think is 3 times. You sort of do something at the start, you do something shortly after it started, and you do something as it's sort of finishing off, to just try to get it to be a nice even fermentation process with nutrient available. That's a product that you buy, that's the way they tell you to work it. And so I'm not going to say don't do that. All I can say is I don't do that. I give a yeast nutrient at the start to get it started, and then I let it happen. And that, if you will see that so the diary entries on that page that was linked only goes right back through them, and you see ones where it's pretty clear that the yeast decided it was going to stop before the sugar content was used. I just decided it was going to stop, and I accept that. And what I look to is, was it something conditional? Do I think it was conditional? I will do the recipe again, and I will look to see if there's any other thing that I can control at the outset that will make it go the way I wanted it to go. And I have described how the elderflower one, I have not got that right yet. I have not figured out how to get the right yeast with the right sugar content, with the right infusion of flavor from flowers. And the process behind that is just tedious. And I haven't got it right. So yeah, I read a lot. I'm in a lot of online discussions, and one thing that does kind of worry me about a lot of online discussions today is what they seem to want to do is they want to make it complicated. We want to try and keep it simple. And I mean, that's the title that I have here today for this presentation. It was like, keep it simple, make it tasty. The yeast nutrient, honey, water, oak, easy. Simple ingredients. And you can leave the oak out. You don't need it. So keep it simple. It'll be tasty. And once you get that palate where you can sort of go, this honey, will be really nice. The thing you're doing with your palate when you are tasting the honey is, when you get the sugars turned to alcohol, any flavor that is present will be enhanced. So a strong flavor will be enhanced. And if you love that flavor and you think, I would love to eat that at sort of 3 times the flavor profile or 4 times the flavor profile, you will be just blown away at how happy you will be. And other people just say it's too strong. So probably the most fascinating one for me is I've used macadamia honey quite a bit. It's readily available as supply nearby in large quantities at reasonable prices. And it has, when you taste it, you sort of go, oh, it has that, it's honey. It tastes like honey. It doesn't have an overpowering flavor. It doesn't have anything that kind of grabs my palate. And I like that for a mead honey, because I'm going, if I want to flavor that, if I want to do a melamel, if I want to do some seasoning and spices and things like that, the honey won't be competing with that. It will just enhance that. But having made a mead with the macadamia where all I really added was some citrus. So I put a little bit of orange and a little bit of lemon juice in there and a little bit of orange and lemon zest in this heating up process. And you taste that one and you're sort of going, oh, you know, tasty, little bit of acidity from the citric acid in the oranges and lemons, a tiny bit of that orange and lemon flavor. And if you've got a really good palate, and I can only pick it when I've sort of had a day where I haven't eaten anything strong flavored, right at the back, right at the finish, you taste macadamia. That oily nuttiness just touches your palate at the end. And I've had one or two other people who can pick it, and very few people can. But that's, you know, like you just eat the honey, you can't taste it. You can't. But the alcohol is. I have never brewed and will probably never brew mead with leatherwood honey. That's very distinctive Tasmanian honey. It's a really aggressive flavour, and it's a love or hate. It's a bit like Vegemite, you either love it or hate it because it's such a strong flavour. And so the leatherwood is very distinctive in that respect. Yeah, so. Trying to find a position where I'm looking at that camera, looking at that camera.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for giving me some insights onto your process for doing this for the long term. Thank you.
It's definitely, like I say, I'm not about to stop. And I've had periods where I've been very light touch with the SCA, have gone to very few events, just keep in touch with a few SCA friends. And I've kept brewing. I have not stopped. So it's something that just stays with you. Once you know how to do it and you've found some recipes that you can reproduce and that you find tasty, there's no reason to stop. It's just magnificent. So, and I do have quite a bit of fun with wine vendors. I'm in a wine club and people ring me up about buying wine from time to time. And I love this process where they sort of say, what wine do you like, sir? And I'm sort of going, yes. They go, red or white? And I go, yes. And that it is very strange these days where people expect you to have a very limited palate and they expect you to have particular things that you will go back to over and over again. But I do feel that the SCA and the drinks available from various brewers in the SCA broaden your palate into an area where you can sort of go, I'm willing to drink and try almost anything. As a brewing laurel, people present you things to drink consistently, and they expect you to critique. And this can be very hard sometimes because people can give you some awful stuff, like really bad. So you have to, what do they talk about? They kind of, you have to use the sandwich technique, which is where you sort of go, I really like that you did this. And then you sort of go, here's the meat of the sandwich, or I'm actually going to tell you a few things that you got wrong. And then I'm going to finish it with another nice little bit of bread at the end that says how something else that you did really well. So you learn how to do that. But the other thing, obviously, is that you get these sensational things across your palate. And one of the most fabulous experiences for myself as a brewing laurel judging a competition was when somebody actually presented absinthe done with wormwood. And one of my fellow judges, her expertise was in medieval medicines. And so she had a very deep understanding of the use of wormwood to get rid of worms. So it was actually a medicine. And the young chap who had put it together had just sort of followed through on a recipe that he'd found. And so Cristiona was describing how the flavor should happen on your palate and what should happen as you drink it. And she basically said that you will drink it and you will taste it and you will get the taste of the wormwood itself and the rest of the drink, and it will taste very nice and it will warm your mouth, and then you will swallow it. And then you will feel the heat go down your insides. You will feel it inside you. And I'm going, just come on, you know, you pull my leg, it's not going to be like that. And it absolutely was. Such a wonderful flavour, glorious flavour that the young man had managed to achieve in this distilled process. So he had steeped the herbs in a vodka base, I think it was. So he hadn't done any actual distillation, which we're not supposed to do here in Australia. The excise man wants his money. So he'd done it with a steeping process. And him and his colleagues from a household that did all sorts of brewing, they just blitzed the field in that competition. You know, we were given 10 out of 10s for execution and flavour and all that sort of stuff for multiple things that household of blokes had made. They had it down pat. But that absinthe, I have never had an experience like that since. Just magnificent. And I've had some wonderful wines, some other wonderful meads, all sorts of things that people just do a marvellous job. And you know, I get to team up with you know, Master Drake and Master Alaric and Baron William and myself when we're doing Great Northern War. You know, Great Northern War, you just walk up to the bar, 6 things on tap, and I've got bottles on the side as well. And what do you want? What do you want? Just off you go. 39 kegs, I think, is the most we've ever done at a Great Northern War.
May I ask a question?
By all means.
Have you ever gone and picked wild fruit or berries to make your mead?
I have absolutely done a black currant melamel from wild black currants on roadsides. And that was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Washed everything very, very carefully before juicing the black currants. And that batch was sensational. There is a couple of other things that I'd be quite interested in picking up. Some of the more herb-based things where there's lots of leaves in them. I think quite a few of those, if you're in the right area for the hedgerows to have those kinds of things in them, growing wild, that would be fine. I've grown quite a lot of various things in my garden, and you know what's the difference necessarily of going to the thing that you planted and nurtured in your garden and picking and using it in your brew, as I have done with the ginger for this one that's here. If you go out into the wilds and you know the plants well enough that you can just sort of go, I'll have this and I'll have this. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of these things always comes down to food safety from that point of view. So you want to be sure that there's nothing in the environment where they've tried to poison things and they're all coated in some horrible thing that you're going to poison yourself with. But if you're happy that you could pick that apple off that tree and eat it, as opposed to pick it off that tree and crush it up, get the juice and brew it, yeah, I wouldn't hesitate. Wouldn't hesitate at all. And as I say, the black currant that I did from roadside weeds, effectively, fantastic.
Yeah, like Xavier, I excuse me. I also live in the Northwest, but I'm on Vancouver Island in BC. So we have a lot of wild plants up here we can basically utilize.
Yeah.
So we even have bearberries.
Okay, I can't say I'm familiar, but
no, it's what our wild bears eat. And I
Okay.
think Xavier can back me up on that one. They might have them in Washington, Oregon area, but they're lucky they have the Oregon berry. That would be an interesting mead.
Yeah, if there's anything that has a flavor that you sort of go, well, if I can either juice that or extract something or steep it in the mead as it's brewing such that it will give that flavor off. So in Xavier's experience where the alcoholic yeasties just took the flavor out, that's a shame. And you have to try these things. And whether or not they add any sugars to it, if you're able to juice them properly, have they got much by way of a sugar content that they're going to add, which will change the specific gravity and the profile from that. So yeah, I mean, crushing things up and getting a wash from them to extract flavor is one that when I first started with black currants, that's what I did. It was like you'd get a pot like this of black currants, and you would I would crush them with a potato masher and then effectively wash it through with water to effectively get a watered down version of the juice. Because black currants are full of seeds. They're extremely difficult to press, very hard to do.
Have you tried using a colander with a cloth? My mother used that when I was a young girl, when she would make her jams and jellies, and she would cook her fruit up, then pour it into this cylindrical cone-shaped colander, and she had her, lack of a better word, masher. It was a big wooden stick that was in it, and she would just twist it around, and all the juice would then come out, and she'd be left with the basics, the fruit and the seeds and the skin. It never went in.
I mean, that sounds very effective technique. One thing I would warn people about, if you're trying to brew with any fruit that you have cooked, right, or heated to any real extent, you have activated the pectins. And by activating the pectins, you will find that it wants to be jam. And so it will be your cloudy nature of it will remain a very long time. And so if you do find yourself in that situation where you've heated a fruit to extract the flavor from it in that kind of a manner, and it's still good, you've got a good liquid, it's brewed nicely, but it still remains extremely cloudy, pectic enzyme. So there is an enzyme that you can buy from brew stores, which if you follow the directions and add it to the brew, it actually binds the pectin that's in suspension in the brew, and it will settle out and you'll be rid of it. And so you can get the clarity that you need from any fruit. I had one of the Digby recipes is Dr. Harvey's pleasant water cider, of which he drank much, making it his ordinary drink. Which I have made once, and I keep telling myself I will make again. And that is in fact where you stew apples, a lot of apples, a whole, I can't remember what the term he used is, a bushel. So you stew up an entire bushel of apples. So, lots of peeling, lots of cutting, lots of stewing up. And then you brew off the liquid, not the fruit. And that activates the pectins up the kazoo, but it is a very low alcohol cider, and because it's kind of been stewed, you've kind of activated the sugars, and it tastes magnificent, just really, really nice. So I keep saying to myself, I will do that, and I will stew the apples in a big pot over an open fire and try to get some smokiness in there. I keep telling myself I'm going to do that, and I have not. So, in a few years' time, remind me as we go, and I'll sort of see if I've actually done it. So, yeah. So that's with fruit. If you heat it, just watch out for activating the pectin. That can be something where you've got to add a pectic enzyme to get it to settle.
So that was actually pretty much what my question was going to be about, because I typically make just traditional meads, and something I haven't been able to put my finger on is hazing. Some batches haze, some don't. And am I correct that it has something to do with the pectic enzymes or something like that?
If the fruit is something that any amount of heat is likely to make it good for doing jam, it's almost certainly pectin. Yeah, so you've activated the pectin in the fruit, and you need the pectic enzyme to, it binds with the pectin that's in suspension and makes it heavier than the water, and it sinks.
So I'm having this happen with plain traditionals though. So I guess it's something getting into the honey?
With a traditional, when you're dissolving the honey, does it dissolve relatively clear or not?
Yeah, it's fine and clear when I start, and it hazes up during fermentation.
Which yeasts are you using?
Primarily D47 or 71B.
Wow, really? Okay. Well, that's a puzzle. That is a puzzle.
Well, that is not just me.
Yeah, I'm pretty certain, as I said, that the mead yeast that I'm getting from my brew shop is actually repackaged D47, and I get a very good settle out of it. How long are you giving it?
I'm pretty lazy, so I'll leave it for like a year. Maybe I'll rack once in the interim, sometimes not.
I mean, that's a note. I do not rack. I do not at all.
And we're chaining questions that I have, because I know a lot of people, yeast packages are so cheap, so they always buy their yeast. But just out of intellectual curiosity, I've always wondered about carrying yeast from one batch to the next, either like using the cake that's left over or creating a starter with any of those yeasts. And I wanted to ask if you had any experience with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I have absolutely used the lees of one batch to start the next, and it is an absolutely gangbusters start that you get. I used the entire lees out of a previous batch to start the next on top of it. And because it was at a phase where I was doing quite quick meads, they had very short fermentation times, absolutely kickstarted it in a huge way, just very good way to get something to go quickly.
Now, do you add nutrients as well, or do you just go straight with the lees and that's it?
At that phase when I did that, that was quite a long time ago, I was not using nutrient at all at that time, and it went gangbusters straight from one to the next. Now, what I would suggest now, with sort of more years of experience under my belt, that you do want to be cautious about doing that over a lengthy period of time, because at each time you sort of, you're going to take the batch off the top and leave your lees, you have a brief infection time available when you're preparing the next to put it on top. And so you have a possibility that you will pick up something else in that changeover phase, and something else potentially from if the process that you used to make the batch that you're making now was not sufficient to kill off anything that it had before you put it in. So you may end up getting a competition between an existing yeast that will start very quickly and something else that's trying to get a foothold. And if that something else is strong enough, you may suddenly find that what you thought was your yeast base is now dominated by a different strain. And if it's a good one and it's working, then you're in a world of positivity there. It's all going to be great. But you may have effectively changed strain of yeast during the process. So unless you're under very controlled conditions around taking your yeast sample from the previous, culturing it, restarting it, and then re-injecting it, then you just want to be cautious. And I wouldn't recommend you go more than 2, maybe 3 batches following off the lees, unless you were deliberately trying to do an experiment to try to get the yeast that lives around me, because slowly but surely I'm pretty sure that it'll get in there, because it is all around all the time. I would suggest that if I were to leave a batch to naturally ferment in this room now, I'd almost certainly pick up the yeast base from the ciders that I do, or the yeast base from the meads that I do, because it's going to be in the air around here. It's going to be in my environment. And you see some of the very ancient breweries, some of the things they do, you're going, man, I wouldn't even think about doing that.
Well, I was just about to ask about that because of all the stories with using the same wooden spoon and that transferring the yeast and stuff.
Yeah. So have you seen the little wooden, they're like almost like a little tea piece with a little hole in it. Right? So it's a little piece of wood, and if you make a lot of them, you can make like a belt.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
So it's made of lots of little pieces of wood, all kind of interlocked with each other, and it makes a circular belt. And this is a technique that brewers used, where they would make one of those belts out of bits of wood, and they'd put them in the bottom of the vat. Right? And then they'd make their brew, and they were picking off wild yeasts and all that sort of stuff. So they weren't inoculating a particular yeast. And then that thing would sit in the bottom of the vat. And when they bottle off or barrel off or decant or whatever they do, the particular batch, and they're going, I'm not going to make another one today. They take that out, and very similar to what I've got around the place here, you know, where I've got sort of various tubes and things hung up on little hooks. They'd hang their ring of wood that had sat in the leaves. They'd hang it up and dry it. And if this particular place was one where they'd sort of go, you know, you are a magnificent brewer, I am not worthy, may I have some of your yeast? What you do is you go up to the belt, you crack it open because it's an interlinked pieces of wood, you crack it open, pull one out, and give it to somebody, and then relink it. And that person could walk away with a yeast starter on a block of wood and start a batch from that. And that was definitely done. I've seen people who've actually reproduced that. And it's just magnificent. So that's a way of effectively carrying some yeast around with you because it's infused in the wood. And
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that is a process where, exactly as you say, you're taking leaves from one that's got sort of dead yeasts and all that, but it's got some ready to restart yeast in amongst it as well, and just pass it on to a friend. And I mean, I'm sure in this day and age, we've all done the whole sourdough starters, hand those around. And I mean, has anybody done a ginger beer plant from start? So I've definitely done that as well. And I guess that is me doing a wild yeast, but I did it for ginger beer. And that's where you sort of make up a sugar solution and usually find a company that does organically dried sultanas or raisins. So yeast and some ginger and water and, sorry, not yeast, so ginger, water, sugar, and some sultanas, and you put them in a small vessel with an airlock on them, and it will start. You'll get a yeast starter off the skin of the sultana, effectively, or the raisin, which is how you get it off grapes. And that gives you a ginger beer starter, and then you keep feeding it. So you just add sugar over a period of time, and then follow the old sort of wives' handbook of how to make ginger beer. And it's from your starter, you halve the starter, half of it goes with sugar and water into the bottles, and you ferment them in the bottle, and you get ginger pop, which will pop if you're not careful. And then you keep the starter alive, and it's very much the same strategy for a sourdough starter. And I've definitely done those. So I guess, you know, I usually avoid wild yeasts, but I've definitely done that. Yeah. So.
Can I ask a historical question?
Yeah.
It's probably going to be comparing apples and oranges here. But when I was in Tennessee, I went to Jack Daniel's Brewery. The trees there, the buildings there, they were all black with black mold from the brewing process. Back in the Middle Ages, when we were making mead, would we also have produced the same black mold on the plant life and buildings around where it was being brewed? I'm just more curious about it than anything.
So, I mean, you've sort of gone well outside of the sort of area that's directly sort of my expertise, because it's something that's happening around and about. So, and Jack Daniel's, that's a distilled, it's a whiskey, yeah. So
yeah, it's a sipping whiskey. I know, so, like I said, apples and oranges.
Yeah, so what you have to remember with any of the whiskies is that the first stage of making a whiskey is to get something that you can distill. And so they would be brewing large quantities of like an ale base off a malted grain. And so they will be doing a lot of sugars that be available around the area. These processes tend to sort of like ultimately throw things out into the atmosphere. So they'd be doing a lot of malting. They'd be doing a lot of grinding of the malted grains to get the sugars. So if any of these processes throw any of the byproducts into the atmosphere, so you'd have from the malting process and the grinding process, you'd have loose sugar potentially getting into the atmosphere, so malt in effect, husks from the grains themselves. Once again, they're being ground to get the sugars because they do like a beer sparging process to get sugared water or malt sugared water. They brew that and then they distill that to get the whiskey. And so if any of those are releasing that kind of thing into the atmosphere, what it does is it gives a large surface area of like a dust or anything on the plant life. And that is a breeding ground for fungi, molds, and that sort of stuff. Now, you might wonder kind of how I know that, because here in this neighborhood, black mold on exterior of building is quite common. Right? And the reason for that, of all things, is that I'm about 1.5 blocks from a railway line, and that railway line ships coal. And what happens is they don't cover them. They do not cover the railway carriages. And so fine coal dust gets into the air. And so if I go out onto my back deck and wipe the table up there, it comes up black. And it's very, very fine particles. And those particles keep moisture. And then they land on some surface, and then the mold takes over from there. It just goes, oh, I've got a small thing to seed off. I've got some carbon because it's coal, and I'm going to grow. And we get black mold on the walls here a lot. It's all about there being an environment from something. So if those particular distilleries end up with any processes whereby they don't filter the air that comes out from the grind, particularly the grinding process, that's what I'm thinking about, is that they'd have fibrous husk particles getting into the air, getting outside their factories, and anywhere nearby, it just would sit on any surface, and that gives somewhere for mold to grow. Conjecture though, but sounds reasonable to me.
Makes sense to me because I did do a tour of Jack Daniels, and yes, they do make their own, they burn wood.
Mm-hmm.
So they have their own filter. They make their own, I guess, coal filter, but they have to burn this oak down.
Yeah.
So they have their fires outside. But
Yeah.
when I was on the tour, they were saying it's actually coming from when they're brewing, because they do have all those yeasts and hops and everything else that they have to put into their brew.
Yep.
Hops might be a wrong word. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I haven't been there for years.
They do definitely have to have a brewing process to get something
Yeah.
to distill. I would have expected it normally to be an ale. I wouldn't have expected them to hop it to make it a beer.
Yeah, they do make a really good whiskey though, I'll have to say.
Oh,
But I was just wondering if in history, obviously your containers are very sealed, but
yes.
back in the Middle Ages, would they have been as sealed as they are today?
Well, no. No, there are some very well-known beer making processes, particularly if you look into the European areas, the Germanic areas particularly, the whole concept of, I think it's lagering barrels, they're open topped. So you actually see, and to this day, there are some breweries in I think in Germany, where they actually have these absolutely enormous, they are just physically huge barrels, which are effectively half barrels. And it's sort of like swimming pool size. You know, you and I and everybody present could all sort of happily bath in them. They're that big.
Wow.
And so they roll them around the facility by turning them up on their side, and you walk inside them to roll them to where you want them to go. So that's how big they are. And they're open topped. So they put the wort in, open topped, inject it with the yeast, and it is actually the fermentation process that produces the froth on the top, and the froth on the top, I think they refer to it as the krausen, is what prevents rubbish from falling in from the top. It's so thick that it just, dust and dirt and things that fall on the top get stuck on the foam, and the foam is still coming up out of the brewing process. And when it starts to slow down a bit, that's when they go, no, it's ready to go in the barrels and carbonate. We'll take it off whilst it's still not completely dead. And they take it off from the bottom. So they just feed it out from the bottom of the barrel. So, yeah, some of the processes that you see that were done in medieval times, you're going, by our health and safety standards, there's no way you do that. Some of the brewing processes where they filter it across, one of the particular varieties of pine, that just pull the branches off the trees with all the needles and things and lay them all in the bottom of the vat in a nice crisscross pattern, so that all the pine needles effectively form this great big filter, and then you just pour stuff over the top, and it effectively filters the gross lumpy bits out, because there's effectively branches with all these pine needles all crisscrossed underneath the bottom, and they collect it out from below, and they just, and I've seen people reproducing that these days to get that flavor, because that whole sort of that pine oil type stuff to get into the brew. And what was another one I saw being done? So somebody figured out that if you burnt birch wood, had to be birch, and you put rocks into the birch fire, and then when they were really hot rocks, you dropped them in to a barrel of like a beer wort, but you weren't brewing it. You drop the hot rocks in there, and it coats them with sugar, because they're so hot that it caramelizes on the surface of the rocks. And so then you take your caramelized rocks and put them in the bottom of a brewing vessel, and add a beer mix on top of that and ferment it. And so you get this burnt caramel flavor through a beer. And people have just, the things that people do to get a batch going, you're just unbelievable. Some of the things that you see that have been done throughout history, just magnificent. I feel that I've kind of run out of go. So I mean, I think we did pretty well. It was a couple of hours though.
This has been such a fantastic class. I can't thank you enough. This has been great.
It was very important to me to try to actually show it being done. And I think we kind of managed to fit that into a reasonable time frame where you actually saw the process underway. But we've had some good questions as well. So, and I like it when people make me think, because I make no bones about it. I do not know everything. I'm not great with the history and the dates and the period and things like that. And so if you're really into, what did they do in 10th century as opposed to 11th century as opposed to 12th, you're going to have to find somebody smarter than me to tell you about that. Because, my habit in history has been find the recipe, redact the recipe, produce the recipe, did it work, do it again, reproduce, reproduce, reproduce. So
with your leftover fruit, what do you do with it?
Compost in the garden.
What? You don't use it? I'm sorry. I just made an outfit and I used pomegranate in my dye.
Oh, yeah.
Indigo. I used turmeric. I was wondering if you would use that as in like for dyeing of cloth.
I haven't done. I can certainly see that would be possible. The other thing to consider, that whole find recipe, reproduce, reproduce, reproduce. Frequently, I actually don't have the fruit.
Ooh.
So my melamel is done off a blackcurrant concentrate. I don't have the fruit.
Blackcurrant makes a beautiful dye, my lord.
Yeah, and I don't doubt it. given the white t-shirts that I've had that I splashed with blackcurrant concentrate, I can definitely attest to it's impossible to get the damn stuff out. So,
That's because it's got its own tannin in it.
yeah.
Let's, if you have any final words, let's do those. And then I will end the recording and we'll call the class done and we can chat as long as we want.
So certainly it is my sincerest hope that sort of in summary, I have managed to show that the process of making mead is very straightforward. You can do it with a limited amount of equipment and it will be a good result if you're careful. I do want to commend to anybody to try it. It's well worth the effort. And if you enjoy it, do it again. It has been at the core of my SCA experience for decades. And it has given me a great opportunity to go and speak to people that I don't know. It is, in most cases, a very easy conversation starter when you come to somebody and say, would you like to try this mead that I made? And some people will turn you away, but my experience has been they're always very polite and always very reasonable about it and will often give you good reason. And then just move on. I have found camping events particularly, you just wander the campsites at night with bottles under your arm. And it is wonderful. Yeah. So how to win friends and influence people, offer them free drinks.
Absolutely. Thank you.